In this lecture, we are going to give a very brief overview of electrical signaling in neurons. Okay, so we've already talked about the fact that all living cells have membrane potentials, and that just means that the inside of the membrane is going to be negative relative to the outside of the membrane. Okay, and different cells are going to have different values for the resting membrane potentials. For neurons, a nice average value is somewhere around negative 75 millivolts. So again, that's relative. That's the inside relative to the outside. And every cell is going to be slightly different. You'll see different values used probably in different books or in different graphs, but somewhere around in that range is the typical value that's given. Okay, now in addition to having a resting membrane potential, which again all living cells have, certain types of cells are what we call electrically excitable. Okay, and the two classic examples of electrically excitable cells are neurons and muscle cells. We're going to focus mostly on neurons in these lectures. And when we say a cell is electrically excitable, what we mean by that is that these cells, again, not only have resting membrane potentials, but they use changes in their membrane potentials as signals. And in particular, action potentials, you might have heard of these, are rapid changes in the membrane potential. And these changes can travel along a cell membrane like a wave. So we're going to talk a little bit later about how action potentials can travel down the membranes of axons. And in that capacity, okay, these action potentials can travel very long distances within the nervous system, and they are therefore really the basis for electrical signaling in your nerves and your brain. So this is a drawing of a neuron. Different neurons have different shapes or morphologies. Okay, this is somewhat typical of maybe what a motor neuron might look like. Okay, all neurons have the same basic parts. Okay, there's the cell body, which looks a lot like what you might think of when you think of an animal cell. It's got organelles, it has a nucleus in the middle of it, but what makes a neuron different from most other animal cells is it has all these crazy processes coming off of it. And you can see up here all of these kind of short branched looking processes, and these are called the dendrites. Okay, and then there's one long, thick process called the axon, okay, that also comes off of that cell body, and it branches, in this case, and ends in a number of these little stubby ball-like structures, which are called neuronal or axonal terminals. Okay, and the axons of lots and lots of neurons bundle together to form tracts or nerves. So, for example, if these were all a bunch of neurons with little nuclei, okay, and then here are the axons, those axons might all come together to form a big bundle of axons, okay, and that will form a tract if it's in the central nervous system, or what we call a nerve if it's in the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so if you think about it, each nerve that is running through your body is a big bundle made up of the axons of hundreds or thousands of neurons that are all bundled together. And you can think of a nerve as being similar to a bunch of wires, okay, that are all bundled together into a cable. Oops, that should say bundled together into a cable. That's better. Okay, so if you look, each of these little structures right there are axons. Okay, so each of these represents the axon from a different neuron, and a bunch of those are all bundled together to form a fascicle, and then you have multiple fascicles that get bundled together to form the entire nerve. And if you think about it, really large nerves, okay, like your optic nerve, the nerve that runs out of the back of your eye, okay, that nerve has over 1 million individual axons in it. And it's important to realize that even though they're bundled together in a nerve, each individual axon is separate from each of the others. And each individual axon can transmit its own electrical signal, its own action potential. Okay, so neurons typically carry information in one direction, and the flow of information in a neuron typically goes from the dendrites and cell body down the axon to the terminals. Okay, so neurons typically receive information from other neurons, for example, on their dendrites and cell bodies. They generate action potentials, these electrical spiky waves, which can travel down their axons. Okay, and then they pass that signal on to other neurons or to other types of cells down here at that neuronal terminal area. Okay, synapses are communication points between neurons. So if you look, each of these is a synapse. So where that neuronal terminal here, okay, can communicate, can come up to the dendrite of another neuron, and it can pass information, therefore, from one neuron to the next. Now, there are lots of different types of synapses. When most people hear the word synapse, they think of chemical synapses. And chemical synapses are called chemical synapses because the presynaptic neuron, which in our picture would be this one here, okay, releases a specific type of chemical called a neurotransmitter onto the second neuron, the postsynaptic neuron down here. So in this case, this one here, if we're looking at this particular synapse, this neuron up here would be considered the presynaptic neuron, and this one here would be considered the postsynaptic neuron. Okay, and when that chemical, that neurotransmitter, is detected by the postsynaptic cell, it causes an electrical signal to be generated in that neuron as well. Okay, so that's really how neurons talk to each other within the nervous system.